Excellent. It's so special to be able to come together as God's people, all different ages and different stages of faith, and to be able to worship Him together. I think sometimes we can come into church, but these are really special moments, and it's a special and real sacred time for us to be able to worship Him and come together. And I'm just struck afresh today how important that is for us, whether we are talking about a youth camp that's coming up, or whether we're looking at walking with people that are going through a difficult time through their relationships, or whatever it might be. It's such a significant time. And we've been discussing these last few weeks around what does it look like for faith to run deep. And we've been having different conversations, around that. And Carl Faze and his team with Olive Tree Media have put together some wonderful resources around that in terms of how can we continue to develop our faith muscle, if you will. How can we continue to develop being a people of faith, understanding that there is a legacy of faithful people that have come in behind us across the generations. And today we're going to be looking at what does it mean to have our identity in Jesus, and what does it look like for us to resist a multitude of challenges that we face in our lives when it comes to walking out our faith. And in this episode, if you've seen it, or if you want to watch it during the week, Carl Faze and his team, they explore how faith runs deep and having our identity in the person and the work of Jesus by looking at Australia's other religion, they call it. Australia's other religion that they defined as sport, and something that can take our eyes off maybe our relationship with God, and there's a number of things that can do that, and we're going to look at that as we go through it today. But they have this conversation in the context of sport and looking at where is our identity and where do we find our meaning and where do we find our purpose. And for those of us that are children of God, for those of us who are saved by God's grace and we're followers of Jesus, our identity, is in the person and the work of Jesus. But there can be other competing pressures. There can be other challenges that we face in our walk with God. And, for some, it might be sport. For others, it might be other things, and we can explore that later. But it's about where do we find our purpose and our meaning. And sport's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I could divide the room very quickly if we're going to have a conversation about sport. Some of you are like, I'm already on my to-do list this week. What do I need to pick up from the shops on the way home? Others are like, I'm quite interested in what is being said here. But sport, for the Faith Runs Deep crew is an example of something that can take our eyes and take our purpose and meaning away from the one true God. For some, it won't be true for everyone, but for some, you might have a certain team that you support. When they play really well, you're up and about. When they don't play so well, maybe people in your family know, just to give you a bit of distance and not go around you too much. But I checked it this weekend, both the sporting teams in the AFL won yesterday, so I'm guessing everyone's up and about, right, if this is your thing. If this is your thing, you're up and about. Particularly if you're a Port Power supporter, kick the winning goal after the siren. That's pretty incredible in many ways. But what's interesting as well is what other perceptions that maybe other nations have on us as Australians about our sport as well. Because we are a small nation. And in many ways, we do bat above our average in many ways in terms of how we participate in sport. We tend to go a lot better in the Olympics than we really should for a country of 25 million people. And whenever we play a sport of any kind, we think we can win, right? I don't know what it is, but we're just like, yeah, we can get this done. We can win. We don't know much about it. Maybe haven't played it before. This other country maybe has got decades, maybe centuries of experience, but we'll get it done. It's okay. There's just this sort of inbuilt, expectation as Australians that you can kind of make it work. And I saw this firsthand when we lived in London. When Michelle and I were first married, I was PE teaching and Michelle was a physio, and we were over in London for 2 years. And we were in London for all of about 2 weeks. And Australia was playing England in a soccer friendly. Now, growing up in Australia, and particularly in the time where I grew up, I didn't really kind of vibe much on soccer at all. I was thinking, if you play soccer, sort of like the game where people get hit, they fall over for ages. Even if they don't get hit, they still fall over. It didn't really work for me in many ways. And I was in like the mother country of soccer, or what they call football, in England. And it was a really big deal. And I was there for a couple of weeks, and Australia played England in this friendly, and I thought to myself, well, I could just ignore the whole thing and it will go past and there'll be another day tomorrow, or I could actually support Australia. Why wouldn't I support Australia? I'm far from home, let's get amongst it, let's support Australia. And you would not believe it, but Australia won this soccer match. And I was a PE teacher, the Australian PE teacher in an English school in London in a place called Highbury Grove. And I called it the concrete jungle because there was not a patch of grass on the whole school. And we ended up getting the win. And I supported us Aussies like I knew every player on that team. And I didn't know any of them. It's a funny relationship that we can have with sport in many ways. I wonder what your relationship with sport is in your home or in your family. But it would be very shallow, wouldn't it? And be very short-sighted in thinking Australia's other religion was indeed sport. That we'd find purpose and meaning above the purpose and the meaning that we get from our one true God in a game. Mark McCrindle, who's a social demographer, he kind of looks at the times that we live in, he looks at trends and things like that. He did some research to show that 500,000 Australians will attend a sporting match over a weekend in winter, whether it's the AFL or whether it's NRL, whether it's the A-League. There's engagement. That is compared to the 4 million Australians who will be in church each weekend as well. So it's an interesting thought about where do we put our hope, where do we look for meaning as well, and it would be very short-sighted if we put that in the result of a game. So as we've been exploring in this series, Faith Runs Deep, that we have a deeper faith, we have a deep faith that runs through our nation. There's a legacy of faith and there's a legacy of faithful people that point us to the person of Jesus, where we can look to him for our identity and look to him for our purpose in a life. But sport would be an example of what we would call a counterfeit God. It would be an example of an idol for some people if we looked for meaning and purpose in that. And Pastor Tim Keller, he defines an idol as this. And you can read it on the screens. It says, anything more important to you than God. Anything that absorbs your heart and your imagination more than God. Anything you seek to give what only God can give. Anything that is so central and essential to your life that should you lose it, your life would feel hardly worth living. Now, for some, probably a small selection of us, this could indeed be sport in terms of participating or engaging, attending, watching, whatever that might be. But the truth is, on maybe a more honest moment of reflection, there are so many examples of what could be idols or what could be counterfeit gods in our life. Things that we need to identify and guard against if we truly want to develop that faith muscle and also live a life where faith runs deep. For some, it might be money. It might be the idol of your bank balance. And putting that more important than your relationship with God. For others, it might be your relationship status, whether you're in one or not, or how that looks in your life. For some, it might be children and even family. And family can be an idol in our Western culture when we elevate it more important than a relationship from God. And realize that, yes, it is a gift from God, but it isn't more important than God. Success, job title, your postcode, whatever it might be. You can insert your potential idol in from that perspective. I was thinking and praying about this yesterday, and I really feel like at this moment in time in the Western culture, a couple of idols that I think we need to be really aware of, or counterfeit gods. One is comfort. I think coming out of COVID, I just want that, for that comfort. It's been hard. I just want to be comfortable. Just want to have that sense of being in the bubble. And that can become an idol in our lives. That pursuit of comfort, as also is the pursuit of happiness. Just want to be happy. I want my family to be happy. Just want to make everyone around me happy. It's been tough. Just let's be happy. Now, we're not saying these things are bad in and of themselves, right? But when they replace God in your life and you don't do the things that he has for you, or you don't pursue him in a way that he has in your life because of the fact that this becomes more important. Anything that we look to for meaning and purpose above God himself can become a counterfeit God. It can become an idol in our lives. So I wonder, in a moment of honesty today, what would that be for you? What maybe has that been? What is an awareness? Maybe for people that are mature in their faith, what is something that you need to constantly be aware of? Because my experience is that some of these things don't go away. They're there. and maybe we kind of guard against them, but then maybe they creep their way back in. What does that look like for you? For faith to run deep. And for many of us, we're not necessarily worshipping these idols overtly or even sometimes subconsciously, but they can be undercurrents in our lives. They can be undercurrents of desire or undercurrents of attitudes that ultimately do drive our behaviour. For example, we can desire this comfort or control, or some of us can have this power or authority that we're after, or this respect and achievement. And necessarily, like on their own, these things might not necessarily be a bad thing, but when they start to take us away from our first love, when they start to take us away from our identity in God, when they start to shape us in a way we're not shaped as being as formed in the ways of God, then we need to become aware of these things. And this conversation around identity and idols, it reminds me of an interaction that Jesus had with a young rich ruler in Matthew 19. It says this: "Just then a man came up to Jesus and asked, 'Teacher, what good thing must I do to get eternal life?' And 'Why do you ask me about what is good?' Jesus replied. 'There is only one who is good. If you want to enter life, then keep the commandments.' 'Which ones?' he inquired. And Jesus replied, 'You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not give false testimony, honor your father and mother, and love your neighbor as yourself. All of these I have kept.' The young man said, 'What do I still lack?' And Jesus answered, 'If you want to be perfect, then sell your possessions and give to the poor, and you will have treasures in heaven. Then come and follow me.'" In verse 22. When the young man heard this, he went away sad because he had great wealth. You know, in Jesus' day, in the first century, there weren't very many really wealthy people. There just weren't. In the way in which society was operated, we can sometimes read this text through our lens, and our lens is a bulging middle class here in Australia. It wasn't the case in the first century. There weren't many wealthy people really at all. Scholars would show us that this rich young ruler, he was actually quite young. He was between 25 and 40 years of age. He was a religious lay leader and possibly a Pharisee because of his obedience or his adherence to the law. And this young man knew that something was deficient in his life than just simply obeying the law to inherit eternal life. Thus, his question, his curious and probing question in verse 16, "Teacher, what good thing must I do to get eternal life?" And Jesus' immediate move is to move away from the things that he was doing and to point him to the one true God. He said there's only one that is truly good, and he's pointing to Jesus, to God himself. And then this young man, he still knows that he's lacking something. And Jesus talks about, fulfill the commandments, and he's sort of bringing him to this place where he's really wanting to test him. But this young man knows that he's still lacking something. Because what's interesting, if this young rich ruler was a Pharisee, then he would have given away a lot in terms of resources and part of his wealth. But he would have given from a place of plenty. That's where he would have given from. He knew that it was part of his obedience to the law to give, so he would have given, but he would have given out of plenty, and he would have given out of obligation. They would have been driving motivators for him. But Jesus' focus here is he's wanting to get to the core of where this young man's at. He's wanting to get to the core of his heart. The theologian Michael Wilkins says this. He says, "The Pharisees prided themselves on their righteous accomplished through obeying laws. Instead, Jesus takes this young man to the inner place." How beautiful is that? Takes him to the inner place. What about if God today wants to take us to the inner place? He takes us to the inner place where his values are formed in his heart. And he challenges him to see what is his most cherished value. In essence, the ruling God of his life. This is so powerful, this move that Jesus makes with this rich young ruler. In verse 21, he says, if you want to be perfect then, sell your possessions and give to the poor, and you'll have treasures in heaven. Then come and follow me. But for this young man, his wealth, it became his means to his personal identity. It became his place of power, his purpose, and ultimately his meaning in his life. For this young man, his wealth was his idol. It was. And when tested and probed by Jesus, he couldn't give it up. So in verse 22, it says that he goes away sad. And this word sad means he went away grieving, or he went away sorrowful. It wasn't just like unfortunate. It wasn't like he just missed it. Or maybe I'll have another interaction with Jesus. He knew what this meant. He went away grieving. He went away sorrowful from this interaction because he knew what was more important to him. He appeared to follow the commandments. He obeyed the law. On the outside, no one would have known any different. But when pressed by Jesus about where his heart was, he went away sad because his wealth was more important than participating in the kingdom. And I need to be really, really clear here that this passage is not about being wealthy or being poor. It's not about that at all. If you're thinking that, then you're missing the point. The point of this interaction is about where was this young man's heart. And the question for us is, where is our heart before the Lord? Who is our identity in? And do we have any idols before God as our one true God? Gary Ablett Jr., who's a champion footballer, also a man of really strong faith, he says this in his autobiography. He says, one important thing that I've learned during my football career is although it's healthy to strive to be great, it's incredibly important not to go looking for your identity in your achievements. For faith to run deep, for us to have a strong faith in our lives, we do need to resist the idols that are in our lives, whether overt idols or undercurrents and desires. We need to resist these idols. We need to identify them and resist them and put our identity and our trust and our hope in Jesus, and to develop that faith muscle that is wanting to grow in us as a people of faith. So if we were pressed by Jesus today, if Jesus took us, Clovie Crest Baptist Church, and all of us that make it up to that inner place, that he took this rich young ruler, if he took us to that place today and we were pressed by him about where our heart is, let me ask you today, is there an idol in your life that you have placed above God himself, that you need to confess, that has taken the place of God, that is shaping and forming your identity away from his will and his ways? Or are there desires in your heart that are taking the place of God? I encourage you to consider this so that we can be a people where our faith runs deep, confess these things and experience God's healing and his restoration, because faith runs deep as we resist idols and put our identity in Jesus. One of the things I've loved about this series is the stories that have been coming through as well, and I thought today would be a great opportunity for me to introduce you to someone from our congregation that you might know or you might not know, so we can explore this conversation around putting our identity in Jesus and resisting the idols that are in our lives and have a bit of a chat. So I want to do that now. I want to introduce you to Jared Redden. Do you guys want to put your hands together, and Jared's going to come up? We've got a microphone for Jared. Yep, just by your feet. Slick transition. We've got it. So this is Jared. Wanted you guys to meet meet Jared today, and we're going to have a little chat about your life in a way. So thanks, Jared. Tell us a bit about you, and tell us a little bit about your family and how you got here to Clovie.
Good morning. So originally from the Yorke Peninsula, grew up just on a farm inland from Stansbury. Did all my schooling, played footy back there. Got up to under 17s and then decided to come across to town and had a year with the Woodville West Torrens Footy Club. And from there, I was very lucky, very blessed to get given the opportunity to be in the under-18 stateside, and then at the end of the year got drafted to the Port Adelaide Footy Club. Spent 7 years with them, played 16 games in the AFL side, and a whole bunch of games in the Sandful, Woodville and Port Adelaide side.
That's great. You would have kicked that goal after the siren last night, wouldn't you? Just like shell and peas.
Maybe a few years ago. These legs are a bit tired these days.
That's good. And you're married to Hannah, and you've got little Judah as well, who is a little bundle of joy that runs up and down the foyer on a Sunday.
Yeah, this is one of the first church sessions I've been able to sit in for the entirety. So Judah's a lot of fun. 2.5 years old now, and Hannah as well, been married for a few years. I should know exactly, but I think it's about eight years.
Hi, Hannah, who's on the stream today.
No, yeah. She's at work today, so I've gotten away with that one. But yeah, got a great little family growing, so.
That's good. Thanks, Jared. So for pretty much everyone else in the room and probably online, we don't really probably understand what it's like to be in an elite environment. For you to be, at the top of your game, to be, picked up by Port Power. You just say that in a sentence, but that's a massive, sort of thing, and probably a childhood dream in many ways. Tell us a little bit about what that experience playing for Port was like, and maybe what was the highlight of your career?
Yeah, definitely, it was a dream growing up. Back on the Yorke Peninsula, it's school, footy, and then farming, and that's pretty much all there is. And so to be able to do it as a career was a dream come true. And yeah, coming across to the club came straight out of school, so I didn't really have a whole lot of life experience. And you're coming into a career, a job, where straight away you're making some good money. You're in an environment which does have a lot of temptations, and it does become pretty much your entire life is based around football. So it is tough, what we've just talked about, so trying to resist that becoming an idol. But it was an amazing experience, running out on some of the grounds around Australia.
Is there one moment that you kind of look back on fondly?
First game was probably one that I'll never forget. So that was against St Kilda at AAMI Stadium. Bit sad, but AAMI Stadium is no longer around, so that's a bit weird going down there now. But yeah, that, and then also probably running out on the MCG against Richmond. We had a draw against them, so that was a pretty epic game. But aside from the AFL, obviously spent a lot of time with Woodville West Torrens and won 3 premierships with them, so that was probably right up there with the AFL stuff.
That's great. What about some of the challenges? Obviously sport, it can be a bit of a cutthroat environment and industry as well, and there's a lot of pressure, whether it's from external pressure from the media or internally to perform or injury. What were some of the challenges that you faced?
Pretty much everything you said. So internally, there's obviously a lot of pressure, obviously from each other. So you're playing for spots, always trying to outperform each other, just get that edge. Externally, media is a pretty brutal industry. So yeah, just dealing with them. Injuries, I've had my fair share. I've had 10 surgeries during my time with Port. They range from shoulders to knees to hips to I had a hernia. So that was good fun.
I was thinking there might be some, more elderly people in our congregation that have, might need some advice from you, if they're having some surgery coming up.
Yeah, I'm sticking around after church, so happy to have a chat. Yeah, but then also the time commitments as well. So, not being able to go to 21sts, weddings, but also church as well. So I was very lucky to have a really good upbringing. Mum and dad, always very faithful and taking us kids to church. Got 3 siblings as well, so taking the 4 of us to church. But also the family and friends that we formed over the years back home on the Yorke Peninsula. So a lot of those friends came to Adelaide. And I was very lucky to have those supports outside of football. Number one, to take the mind off things, but also to keep me grounded. And I probably went to church to see those guys at times, but just being there was really good for the faith as well.
Yeah, that's great. So it's fair to say, you had to give all of yourself to it. There wasn't really any margin for anything else. Let's talk now a bit more about your faith. How did your faith inform how you went about, playing footy and your sporting career? And how did your faith integrate into, into the 4 walls of the club as well?
As I sort of touched on, having that base before I went to the football was really important for myself. And I can't talk enough about how important having those supports in place are in an environment like football. Because there were certainly challenges and times where you do get sucked into that lifestyle. But having those supports really. And I was lucky enough to have another teammate who was Christian and a churchgoer. So just having that inside was really good. And then we had a really good chaplain as well, Brandon Chaplain. So Chappie, it was he was a really good support as well.
That's great. And how was it that you resisted that kind of temptation to put your kind of identity in you Jared the footballer, and how did you keep growing in your faith, and how did you kind of resist that temptation of that kind of idol of success in that way?
It was really tough, and I'm sure there was times where I probably did get sucked into it a bit, but it's really difficult because everyone outside of that close family and friend circle, the only thing they talk to you about is football. So it's just football wherever you go. And I think, I can't thank Hannah, my wife, enough just to be that support and trying to help me along the way, I guess. But just being an example in football was probably the best way that I could sort of bring my faith to the AFL. I was never someone who was very loud in my faith in football. I know there's some people like that, but I found just being an example was a powerful way for myself to do that.
That's great. And just lastly, kind of post-footy now for the Power, how do you continue to, cultivate that first love? How do you continue to cultivate, your relationship with God?
As we started off saying, I've, we've been able to make this home now. So just trying to become a bit more involved with the church. But football is still part of my life, so still playing back in the country.
You played yesterday?
Yeah, played yesterday, so a bit tired today. A few sore aches and pains, but football always seems to take up some of that time that you need to get to church. So still get to our home church back home, but now we've got the chance to share and bring Judah up in the Lord as well. So it's exciting.
That's great. Thanks so much, Jared. Can we put our hands together for Jared and just sharing with us today? Thanks, bud. We've been just discussing in this series the importance of storytelling, and I thank Jared for his willingness today to be open and vulnerable. But we all have a story, right? We all have a story of God's grace in our lives and the faith that we have in him because of his faithfulness. And we want to just take a moment now. I want to give us all an opportunity just to maybe respond to what the Lord's been saying to us today around how our faith will run deep as we resist these idols. Whatever that is in your life, whatever it is that can take the place of God in your life, and to put our identity in him. So let's just take a moment now. I just encourage you to bow your heads and just to have an opportunity before the Lord now. Is God, by his grace, identifying in your life today any idols or any undercurrents or desires that are shaping you away from the things of God? Is there an area in your life today that you need to confess before the Lord and say, Lord, this has become more important than my relationship with you, and I'm sorry? God, I thank you that you want to keep growing us in our faith. And Lord, I pray today that you'll give us the eyes to see if there are any idols, any things that we place above you in our lives. Lord, I pray that you will do a deep work where our identity is in you, Jesus. And that faith will run deep in us, individually, in our families, in us as a church, Lord. Lord, we will be a light on the hill. Lord, we will add to conversations and to environments, Lord, because of your work in us. Lord, I pray you'll continue to shape us and grow us in your ways. And Lord, today we want to, all of us, Lord, reaffirm to you, Lord, that our heart is for you first. Our heart is for you first. You are our one true God. So continue to grow us and shape us, I pray. Will you stand with me? Let's sing together.